Sherry from Storehouse Media Group. Sherry, how are you? And I know you're excited about our guest today.
I am. I am. His name is Tom Jones. So welcome, Tom. And he writes under the pen name of Thomas Volson. And we're going to talk about him because he's a very accomplished author, and we just want to, since we talk about books, Tom's a really good person to have on to talk about them. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Tom, you have, you know, you've had a career, a long career with IBM, and then you started writing. So tell us about that career. That just sounds, when you think of somebody with IBM, you surely don't hear the stories that you tell. And explain that. I mean, you were an Army officer, and then you got involved with, you went on to school, you got your undergraduate, you got your master's, and then you went on to work for IBM. And then you just had some,
Hmm.
what people don't think of with when they think of an IBM employee.
Yeah, I think I've had a lot of exposure to things that would make good stories. And, I've got 3 degrees. I got my bachelor's in math and accounting. So I got a little bit of finance in there. And then I carried on with the math and got a master's in engineering. And then I decided to broaden out. Instead of getting a PhD in engineering, I got an MBA. And so all my books have a lot of heavy finance in them, global finance. And I have a lot of things that people don't know about. And, so a lot of it is factual. I worked with a lot of financial institutions, and I worked with Mellon Bank for a while in Pittsburgh while I was with IBM. Um, so, and then I worked with a lot of intelligence agencies directly. I was assigned to projects in Washington, D.C. for several years. I worked on projects with Homeland Security, and that involved both the FBI and CIA. A lot of interesting stories there. I had an 18-month project with the IRS. I got checked out by the FBI for all my security clearances and, of course, fingerprinted and all that. And then I got a project with the U.S. Met after the IRS project was over. And I was surprised. This was back in 2001. I was surprised the U.S. Mint has their own security group. They wouldn't accept anything from the FBI. I thought that was strange. So they did everything again. I even got re-fingerprinted. They wouldn't even accept the fingerprints from the FBI. I understand that a little bit more today, but they didn't trust the FBI. So um, a lot of that is in some of my novels. And then with the degrees I have, I understand a lot about the science and engineering and finance. And so I also worked with Rand Corporation that was formed after World War II to try to prevent World War III. And I worked with a lot of those people in very interesting projects. Um, and even though I had 3 degrees at the time, and from major universities, and the MBA program I went through was ranked number 8 in the nation. So I thought, that should be pretty impressive, but all the people I worked with at Rand had 2 PhDs. It was their trend at the time to get one PhD from the Ivy League, from either Harvard, Yale, or Princeton, or one of those universities, and then get a second PhD on the West Coast at Stanford or Berkeley, one of the prestigious universities there. Some had them from USC out there, and I lived in Los Angeles for 9 years, and that's mainly where I worked with Rand. They have a Santa Monica office in addition to a Washington, D.C. office, and they have their own private beach there in Santa Monica. Great place for thinking and discussing things. And they had one lady there. She had the two PhDs, and she regarded me as a Neanderthal. She didn't want my opinion on anything, and she thought, I just wasn't that good. Everyone else at Rand thought I was and were very complimentary. But I decided then that I wouldn't advertise the universities on my website. So again, my website is Thomas Belson, B is in Victor, BELSUN.com. And so I've got a lot about all that on my website in the About the Author section. And the rest of it is advertising the Hidden Empire and giving a synopsis of the events that take place in the Hidden Empire. But a lot of it is factual. And I don't know if you want me to keep rambling on
You
about
know,
some.
well, I have some questions. I mean, what
Yeah.
inspires you as an author? What do you think inspires you to write what you write?
Well, my background actually, the getting the 3 degrees and working with some top banks in the country like Mellon Bank. Um, and then I did a lot of work regarding some of the Federal Reserve activity. So that experience, along with the experience with the intelligence community, inspired me. I thought while I was doing all that, hey, there's some really good stories in here. I told Sherry earlier that I actually, in one of the meetings with FBI agents and CIA agents working on a Homeland Security project, in some of the meetings, the FBI agent that was in charge of the investigation of the World Trade Center bombing in 1993, where they set off the bomb in the parking garage of one of the towers. I was telling Sherry about that earlier, that agent that led the investigation came to a lot of our meetings. He was a really interesting guy, and he informed us we were investigating terrorist activity, and he was telling us a lot of tricks the terrorists used if we ever encountered some of them firsthand. So he was a very interesting guy, and I'd say he was probably the number one inspiration for my thinking. I need to write some of this down. There was also a CIA guy that I actually worked directly with um, that was a specialist in safe cracking. And he had an interesting story. He said, he was helping one large bank that I worked with their security for their safe, and that that bank president said no one could get in their safe, that it was, impossible to get in. So the next morning, the CIA agent said he went to the bank president. He said, have you checked your safe this morning? And he said, not yet. He said, well, go check it. So the bank president opened it up, and there were smiley face stickers over everything inside the vault. And so, this guy was really good at what he did. So he was an inspiration too.
Wow. I mean, I think that when you get to tell stories and your experience, you must have loved your job, didn't you?
Most of what?
Loved what your job, working, what you did for a career, your
Oh
career.
yeah, I loved it. Yeah.
Absolutely. I just want to, that's the important thing is when we're able to come creativity, it's through what our passions are. Isn't that true,
Yeah.
Sherry?
That's true.
No.
And I tell people, I know it says write what you know, but I'll top that off and say write what you're passionate about. because people will pick up on that passion. Readers pick up on it, and they run with you on that passion. They love it. I love the passion. So yeah, you're writing what you know, but you're also writing what you're passionate about. And you've done 24 books. You've gotten the first book out. Are they all the same genre? Are they the same story? Or you've got different stories going on with different books? How's that working?
Well, it's working fine. I've had a lot of literary agents make comments on a lot of different ones. I have several series, and of course, The Hidden Empire is in a series of 4 books that all takes place here in Jacksonville. And, I've actually worked with businesses in Jacksonville. I did some consulting after I retired here in Jacksonville. So they all take place in different cities around the U.S. They all involve a lot of different countries. I worked in France for a while. I worked in Puerto Rico for a while. Both were totally different in just about every way, but I got a lot of perspective from actually working in different countries, and I never, I communicated with a lot of different countries. My son worked in the Middle East for a while. Got a lot of stories from him. My wife actually got a chance to go over and visit, and she actually visited in Vienna and really loved it over there. Had some great stories. So anyway, I've had a lot of exposure, and it kind of comes full circle back to wanting to tell some of the stories. So um, I would say all of my stories kind of have a central theme. Back in my younger days, I'm 83 now, I'll admit it. But back in my younger day, and I had 40 years of business, a couple of years in the Army, and several years in the Army Reserve with a secret clearance there. And I did a lot of work on intelligence while I was there, although I was an adjutant general officer. I was in the Army at the time of Vietnam, so I was told I could officially claim to be a veteran of the Vietnam War. I never was in Vietnam, but I had to train. I taught classes of 40 officers each that had come out of ROTC and various universities, and I had to teach them to fight in Vietnam. So um, I was well versed on fighting and the type of fighting you had to do in Vietnam. In World War II, the adjutant general officer never got below brigade level, so they never got close to the front lines. In Vietnam, there was no front line, and you had to lead your clerks and typists on recon patrols. And so I got a lot of stories back from the guys that went over, and it was pretty interesting. So I had that experience, and I was a weightlifter. At that time, the Adjutant General School was in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I in college, and I was an athlete and a weightlifter, and I lifted heavy weights, and I could bench press over 300 pounds and military press around 225. I did multiple reps, so that's about where I cut off. I have an interesting story about that later on, um, but when I went through the adjutant general course myself, which was a 9-week course, the first 3 weeks were all training for fighting, and which is I was called a military leadership instructor. So I was one of 3 that we had there, and we took most all of our classes to Fort Knox because we didn't have all the facilities there to teach combat training. So we took them there to crawl under machine gun fire and do all the things you need to do to be ready to fight. Um, so, but at any rate, first 3 weeks of the 9-week course was that, and then and we had multiple classes at one time, and so just about every week we were taking one of the classes down to Fort Knox. So did that. My wife even got to go along one time and sit in the stands. They had stands there for what they call the infiltration course, which is where you crawl under live machine gun fire, um, through the mud, under uh, barbed wire with explosives going off around you. They make it as scary as they can. My wife got to sit and watch all of that. So it was pretty interesting. So we went through all that, and we always the James Bond movie Goldfinger was out at the time of most of that, and most of the officers had seen it. So we always took them by the bullion depository there before we took them back home. So
And
a
that's
lot of
fantastic.
interesting stories with all that.
It's amazing stories, Sherry. And that's
I
what you've told
know.
all your authors. Everyone has a story.
That's
I
right.
was interviewing an author today and just said that. And I think that everyone misses out in writing a book because they have a story. Not everyone can tell it on a podcast. Not everyone can tell it, going out in social media or to their public. But a book really tells that you had once you start brainstorming those ideas and coming down with something, you have a real great story to tell. And Sherry, best place the Thomas's books. So basically, they're all going to be coming out soon to find out. But the one, Tom, right now people can get. Where can we find your books, Tom?
Okay, they can go to my website, thomasbelson.com, and all the usual stuff before Thomas Belson. So just standard website. Um, so immediately it gives a picture of the book. It, shows that, and it gives a synopsis of the book, and then it has an about the author section that says a little bit about what I just went through. And you can order it. It's got Amazon buttons for Amazon and Barnes and Noble right there immediately where you can click either one of those and go out. It also has a lot of other places you can go. People can go out to the wildrosepress.com and check it. I've forgotten whether the Wild Horse Press is .com or .net, but they can find it.
Right.
But it has all the places that it sells, which is about 10 or 12. So kind of like you've heard a lot of authors say, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and all the places books are sold. Walmart's one of them. Right now, it's only on the websites. It's not in the stores.
Right. That was the special simulcast. Again, go to storehousemediagroup.com right now to schedule a call with Sherry today. Appreciate Sherry. Thanks again, Thomas, for the
Thanks,
amazing
Tim. Thanks,
stories.
Tom.
All right, that was